Hi, everyone. Welcome to our final week. This week, we have a discussion board, but really what I want to focus on this week is your final project submission. So I've gone through, I've listed the instructions in green, an example from a previous class where a student did really well in yellow, and then like a pink, which are basically the things you want to remember to put in your final project. I have the pictures that you're supposed to add, what those look like, the charts, the graphs, everything is included here and should help you to complete this final project to the best of your ability. So let's get started. First, you're going to want to upload a table 3. It can be from any time you have gone through the simulation. I think it recommends either the stagnation or the roller coaster, but whatever you have, submit your table 3 from EconLand. These are the instructions for the very first part. Basically, this is just going to be your introduction. You're going to add table 3, and then you're going to do a 2 to 3 sentence summary. So you're going to choose your scenario. They did roller coaster, and this is the rating, how they did. You can say, I did terrible on this simulation. It will not impact your grade at all. You just need to talk about your results and how you did. So this is just an example that someone wrote. Next, this is our next instruction. We're still in taxation. So we're going to talk about the taxation policies. Add an image from table 1 and discuss your results. So this is what your table 1 should look like. And then we're going to talk about your results. So explain your intent for the taxation policy decisions you made. What were the principles or models that influenced your decision making? This is what someone put: as a proponent of increased government spending to boost the economy instead of tax cuts. My taxation policy decisions were intended to avoid decreases in taxes. Thus, the tax rates remained the same. My decision was based on the intention to maintain tax revenues and prevent an increase in debt. So they did not want to lower the taxes because they were worried about our national debt. Very good answer. Identify the impact of your changes. Did this work for you, basically? Based on my taxation policy decision, no tax cuts were made. Tax rate remained, and then they listed what they had, and then they talked about the changes. They talked about unstable global economy and global growth forecast. These are just very good ideas. What you're going to want to just remember, these are the things that I want you to remember when you're completing this part. When we cut taxes, we end up with more money as consumers. This will influence us to spend, and our GDP will increase. Unemployment will decrease because we're spending, and then our inflation will increase. A tax increase influences GDP to decrease, unemployment to increase, and inflation to decrease. So whatever answer you give should correlate with these basic economic principles. Note, we're still in taxation policies. We're finishing up this section. We're going to compare and contrast the impact of our tax policy with those of either current or historical examples. You can think about a number of tax policies, but if once you use someone else's research, be sure to cite it. These can get a little tricky. Really, there's some good times that we like to talk about when there were significant tax cuts. One was during Reagan's tax cuts, 81 and 86. Those are very important ones because they really changed our basic society. With the lowering of the tax cuts, it's really allowed people that have wealth to really build that wealth. And so these are really still discussed very strongly in our society. Another important set were during the Great Recession, the 09 ARRA, and then the 08 Economic Stimulus Act. Those were both good examples. Or you could talk about the 2017 Trump tax cuts, whatever interests you. And then this one talks about the 2008 Economic Stimulus Act, and you can read through what the student has put on this for their example. I'm definitely going to add the PowerPoint. So if there are things in here that I'm glossing over as I present it that you want to go back and reread what someone put, feel free to open up that PowerPoint and get a more of a closer view at some of this, because there's a lot of information covered here. We're going to dig into our next section, which is on government spending. So now we're going to look at fiscal policies. You're going to create images of your ADAS model. Remember, we did that in the discussion board, so you can definitely just pull that image over, and then we're gonna talk about some of these changes. This is the graphic you're supposed to add. It's 2 bar graphs, one for GDP growth, one for employment rate. Just pull those from EconLand and then put them into the final document. If you cannot get a hold of any of these for some reason, you can screenshot what I've used in this presentation and put those as your own, and then explain what your results were from when you did it, or you can do the simulation again. Remember, this simulation stays open, so feel free, if you don't like your results, go in and do it again. So now we're going to look at your decision making regarding government expenditures and how it changed based on the economic conditions. Government expenditures were an area you could adjust throughout the 7 weeks, and you were given an option between 0 and 1,000 billion in spending. Okay, this is someone's response. Increased government spending has been a tool. Yes, it's definitely a tool that we use in the real world as well. I increased government expenditures to keep up with inflation and the roller coaster global economic growth forecast. And then the student talks about his or her decisions and how they impacted those final results. Then you're going to want to evaluate fiscal policy decisions and how they impacted key macroeconomic factors such as GDP growth and unemployment, and to what extent did your policies yield positive or negative outcomes. You're going to want to refer to your model. So this person then talks about those results and how they impacted things. What I want you to remember from this section is that increasing government spending causes GDP to increase, because we are going to make the goods and services that are being demanded. I think about this a lot in reference to Wichita, because they have a lot of the airlines, and whenever there is a recession, a lot of times the government will decide to order some planes that come out of this area, and then unemployment will actually go down in certain areas just because they are really stimulating that spending, and this will reduce unemployment, just like I just said. The inflation can go up if the economy gets overheated with excessive government spending or excessive expansionary policy, whether it be fiscal or monetary. And sometimes we can see that as well. Sometimes inflation doesn't really move a whole lot. It hasn't moved between 1980, say 3 and 2000 or 2021, maybe for like 40 years, it didn't really move a whole lot. So the inflationary issues can either exist or not, depending on how the economy is being monitored. The opposite is true in that if we reduce government spending, GDP will decrease, unemployment will increase, and inflation has the potential to decrease. Remember, when we talk about that ADAS model, here's one where the aggregate demand curve is shifting outward. That just means we had maybe an increase in government spending. You can draw it to show, a decrease if that would be interesting to you. And then here we're going to talk about what an example of this might look like. And this is just what we talked about in the previous slide. We will see this aggregate demand curve shifting inward when we have higher unemployment, and outward with lower unemployment. It typically shifts outward when GDP increases and inward when GDP decreases. You can also think of an overheated market when you could potentially end up with inflation. And then, let's go through the aggregate supply curve. It's showing the GDP that firms produce. If the price goes down, remember, we're gonna, the supply will be reduced as suppliers want to supply more when the price is more. We definitely, if we're producers, we want to make money. And then that can cause our supply curve to shift inward. When it shifts outward, we see a decrease in unemployment and inflation. Next, we're going to look at monetary policies. Remember, these policies are the ones that are created by the Federal Reserve. They are not created by the president. They have their own separate entity. So use the graph, the bar graph that you have from your EconLand simulation. And here are kind of the instructions. Explain how you change interest rates. By interest rates, they're meaning Fed funds rate, if you've heard that on the news, and how those changes impacted other variables. These are somewhat easy to see because anytime the Fed funds reduces rates, they do so to expand the economy in some way. And so here, here's the students' comments in yellow, and here are my comments. When the interest rates are low, the economy grows. We want to buy houses, we want to buy cars because our loans are going to be cheaper. That growth is called an expansion, and our GDP will go up. When it goes up, more employees will be required, and then this will decrease our unemployment rate. The economy can get overheated when we reduce our interest rates, and we can have higher inflation during those times. The opposite is true here, and I wrote that down below as well if you're thinking about an opposite situation. So we're going to compare and contrast the impact of the policies with current or historical examples. So there are several interesting time periods. One was during the 2008 Great Recession. The Fed funds dropped at or near zero to stimulate aggregate demand. The other was in 1979, 1980. Paul Volcker, he was the chair of the Fed at the time. He increased the Fed funds really dramatically to reduce inflation. A lot of people did not find him to be a very popular guy. This made a huge impact though, and within a couple of years, it changed the economy dramatically. It was just very moving to look back to. If you ever have any spare time and you want to look at this time period, this is really the time when you saw what monetary policy could do for an entire economy. It's very exciting. And now, really our last section, we're going to look at this in as far as a global context and determine how the impacts of our policy may be impactful if we're in an open economy versus in a closed economy. So, and this is what I want you to remember. So I'm going to go through this, and this was someone's example. So remember, when we are looking at open economies, they're going to be impacted by others. Sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. If we have a closed economy, there's no one we have to lean on when times are tough. When we have an open economy, we can lean on others. However, when they struggle, we struggle. And then this is the part that's probably pretty important. In the case of a fiscal expansion, the rise in interest rates due to government borrowing attracts foreign capital. In their attempt to get more dollars to invest, foreigners bid up the price of the dollar, causing an exchange rate appreciation in the short run. The appreciation makes imported goods cheaper in the US and exports more expensive, leading to a decline in the merchandise trade balance. And then I go over what happens with foreign countries. Read through that, make sure your response kind of correlates with some of these key models. And then you're going to talk about your conclusion, your effectiveness. Oh, people usually forget this consumer confidence section, so don't forget to add that in as well. I put some reminders on consumer sentiment. It's one of our economic indicators that show where consumers feel our economy is headed. They predict how strong our economy is. The student did a great job writing conclusions and then writing about consumer confidence. I hope this helps you as you do your week 8 project. Have a great day.